Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Racing News 365.com podcast, looking ahead to this weekend's Canadian Grand Prix. From Racing News 365.com, my name is Nick Golding and I'm joined as always by 2023 Young Journalist of the Year Sam Coop and lead editor Ian Parks. Gentlemen, we've had the double header and a week off. F1 is back this weekend with a traditional halt of the European leg with a quick trip to Montreal. For me personally, it's one of my favourites of the season, thinking back to 2007, Lewis Hamilton's first win, of course, Robert Kubica's huge crash, which led to Sebastian Vettel making his debut in the following race. The following year, in 2008, Kubica then won the Canadian Grand Prix. Look then at 2011, the race that lasted 4 hours, Jenson Button overtaking Sebastian Vettel on the last lap. More recently, 2019, and the huge drama between Sebastian Vettel and Hamilton, which obviously led to Vettel winning the race, but with a 5-second time penalty, finishing second. The whole scenes afterwards of him changing the number 1 and number 2 stands in Parc Fermé. It's a race which has a track record of always delivering something quite extraordinary.
And it has its Wall of Champions, of course.
The Wall of Champions.
That infamous wall where so many have buried their car or scraped it, nose, wheels, whatever. It's one of my favourites. I love Montreal. I love visiting Montreal as a city, first and foremost, as a place to be. And then from an absolute racing perspective, I think it's a fabulous track. Those long straights that lead into those numerous overtaking points. It's just an old school track. And as I say, the Wall of Champions, it's collected so many over the years. That's why it's got its name, of course. And for me, just going through all those different incidents just goes to show just how much has taken place over the years. That 2011 Jenson Button victory, one of the greatest victories of all time from use the phrase, non-pure racing perspective, i.e. it just wasn't a standard format race, was it, in many respects, with that massive rain delay. And then just everything that played into it, Jenson dropping to last at one stage and then coming through to win it, as you say, on the last lap. For me, one of the greatest Grand Prix victories of all time, just from an overall entertainment perspective. Sam, what about you, mate?
I mean, well, first of all, I'm impressed that Nick's, seemingly inhaled the Canadian Grand Prix Wikipedia page this morning for breakfast.
It is a race I remember well because I was only 11 years old and it was past my bedtime in particular. So I remember being allowed to stay up because obviously there was all the delays and the red flags with the rain, and those things as a child just stick with me. It's one of those things. But thank you.
Oh, absolutely. But it traditionally also has the kind of the first corner chaos that we've seen. I think it was I think it was 98 with the vert going upside down moment in the first corner at Canada. So there's always something that you feel is going to kind of happen. There's a lot of anticipation when F1 goes to Montreal. So yeah, I think it's also one of my favourites. It's up there with Interlagos in that sense. And so yeah, I always look forward to it. And yeah, we've had some really memorable moments over the years. Those wins for Hamilton and Kubica, as you mentioned, Nick. So yeah, I'm excited, and I also feel that given the last 3 rounds, given how Red Bull have struggled, there's an air of anticipation as well. How will they fare in Montreal? So yeah, there's a lot to look forward to.
The word there that you said that's really key is anticipation, because coming out of Imola and Monaco, the big question now is, do we have a championship fight? Red Bull have struggled in the past 3 rounds. Charles Leclerc is only 31 points behind Max Verstappen. Ferrari are only 24 behind Red Bull. The big question is, will the Canadian Grand Prix prove that a title fight is actually on the cards, Ian?
I think we've got the semblance of something different happening. Whether these are the first rungs on the ladder to a full-blown championship fight, I really don't think we're going to get to that point until we come out of the triple header that follows Canada, when we go to Spain, Austria and Silverstone. I think if Ferrari and McLaren are still giving Red Bull a hard time, as they have been doing these past 3 Grand Prix now, going through these next 4 Grand Prix, then yes, I think we can comfortably say when we will be at the halfway stage of the season, we've got something here to then look forward to over the second half. So as I say, let's just give it a little bit more time. We've seen definitely signs in Miami, Imola and Monaco that Red Bull is most certainly coming under pressure right now. We know for a fact in Monaco especially, and we discussed this on the podcast as well, last week's podcast out at Monaco Grand Prix, that car, the RB20, is struggling with its curb riding. It's struggling with the bumps. Red Bull has made clear that that's not a quick fix. We know in Canada, the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve is renowned for the requirement of a good car to ride those curbs, because you've got to get good entry, good exit out of these slow corners to then accelerate away down the long straights that are prevalent at that circuit. So I think we're going to see Red Bull definitely struggle again, certainly with regard to its curb riding. How much of an impact that will have on lap time compared to Monaco, because Monaco, as we know, is all about the corners, all about the curb riding, because it's such a short track, so many corners, 19, whereas at least Red Bull will have the opportunity to get on the power with those long straights. So I don't think Canada will have too much of an impact on Red Bull this time around, but certainly they are going to need an element of performance through those slow corners to aid their lap time, which we know will then come down those long straights.
Something else that's always quite peculiar about the Circuit de Gilles Villeneuve and Montreal in general, Sam, is that it's not always guaranteed to be a dry weekend, as we saw in 2011. The weather can change actually very, very quickly and even go completely against the forecast in general. How difficult do you think it is for the teams to prepare for this weekend, given that it's not a traditional style of circuit, but at the same time, it's also not exactly a straight track either?
Well, exactly, and what further compounds the difficulty around Circuit de Gilles Villeneuve is that there's, as Ian points out, there's lots of slow speed corners, so there's lots of straights, so that is exacerbated those characteristics in the wet. The setup compromise that you need to make is very, very difficult to find that sweet spot. And with changing weather conditions, we've seen in the past where we've anticipated a wet race, everyone's kind of, set the car up as such. Next morning, nice and dry. And you go, okay, half the field are badly compromised here. So it's a lot of guesswork. And obviously the wealth of information afforded these teams from, telemetry all the way through to their weather data is extreme. They know so much. They have so much information, but it can still be wrong. So yeah, it is a difficult and a unique challenge. And yeah, the semi-permanent nature of the circuit as well. It's meant to have been resurfaced this year as well. So another element of unknown. So there's a lot of questions heading into the weekend.
Just took the opportunity there. Sorry to Nick, just to interrupt. Just took the opportunity as you asked Sam that question about the weather to see what the forecast is for this weekend. And at the moment, we have on Friday a 60% chance of rain around FP2. On Saturday, we have a 60% chance of rain around qualifying. And on Sunday, it drops a little bit, but obviously the forecast is a little bit further away. We're looking at a 40% chance of some rain around race time. So fascinating stuff there that, as you've pointed out, Sam, definitely could play a part into what transpires this weekend.
It just adds, though, another element of why we will enjoy the Canadian Grand Prix so much. But let's start looking at some of the teams and drivers in particular ahead of the weekend. And of course, we started talking about Red Bull, and it makes sense to start there because that's the team who really have all the eyes on them. Are they just going through a tough period? Is this a genuine problem with the RB20? Have they really been caught? As you mentioned, Sam, obviously the circuit has been resurfaced. However, curb riding and having a car that is comfortable riding the curbs is still absolutely pivotal to a great lap time. Do you think this is another track actually where we could see Ferrari or McLaren on top rather than Red Bull?
I think it depends across the sessions. I think Ian's absolutely right in terms of pure lap time. How much loss will there be for Red Bull? What makes it a different proposition from Monaco, though, is that especially heading out that kind of last chicane, it's not as much of an overtaking spot as kind of heading down towards it. But if they're not getting the right exit, they could be vulnerable into the first corner. And yes, they have superior straight line speed. So it's just to what degree that affects them during the race. Because, yeah, I think in pure lap time, it will be less of an impact than Monaco. But again, it's a circuit that lends to more overtaking considerably. I mean, every other circuit than Monaco lends to more overtaking, let's face it. So I think it could be a difficult weekend. But again, I think we also need to kind of temper expectations. A difficult weekend for Red Bull is still in the fight for the win and potentially, realistically, probably still slightly ahead. Estimates from, say, Carlos Sainz are that he thinks McLaren about half a tenth back. He thinks they're probably 1.5, 2 tenths back. So they still do have that dominant form. And so, yeah, I think it's easy to run away with just how bad things have got for Red Bull at the moment.
The thing you say there, though, Sam, that's both very true, and that even on a bad day, Red Bull are still fighting for the win. Recently, that's only been the case, though, on one side of the garage, and obviously Max Verstappen. Sergio Perez recently has been really struggling with the RB20, much more so than Verstappen, who just seems to be able to overcome anything that's put in his way. Ian, with that in mind, then, how important do you think this weekend is for Perez, also considering what happened to him in Monaco, both in qualifying and in the first 15 seconds of the race?
Yeah, he's going through that bad patch as Red Bull is going through that bad patch. They're pretty much mirroring one another at the moment. It's a difficult time for him again, but we're hearing that more than likely he's now going to be retained for 25, 26. Those are the soft rumours that are slowly starting to emerge. Whether that will genuinely materialise either around this weekend or we're hearing more likely around the Spanish Grand Prix weekend, given the Latin element to that, we'll have to wait and see. If that is the case, that would genuinely surprise me that Red Bull has made a call so early in the season to decide to continue with Checo. He's been a topic on many discussions that we've had on here, that you and I have had, Nick, on our F1 update shows across the Grand Prix weekend. And for me, I would suggest that if he comes out of this, pretty much these same 4 Grand Prix that I've talked about, Canada and then the triple header, and he's still in a similar position, and he has already been retained by then Red Bull will probably be looking at themselves and thinking, perhaps this was too soon. Are they more likely just trying to get stability going forward to prevent all of the speculation that's occurred around Checo? There will be an element to that. They will just want to nip this all in the bud, stop it all now, like they did when he signed his last contract a couple of years ago. They did that one very early. So I would hazard a guess that for Checo, this is Canada in particular, let's deal with that because that's the one coming up. Canada in particular is now a really big weekend for him. He cannot afford to have another bad weekend like he's just gone through, around Monaco. That was just awful for him. That was just one to forget with everything that took place across that entire weekend. So he's got a lot to do around Canada, in particular because he's now got to get back into that rear gunner, right wing man, whatever you want to call him, role, because without a shadow of a doubt, Red Bull is facing a stern fight in the Constructors' Championship for both Ferrari and McLaren. Max Verstappen, as we know, won last year's Constructors' Championship on his own. with the number of points he scored compared to second place Mercedes. Although, yes, it did. Checo did finish second in the Drivers' Championship, which was a little feather in his cap. His points were pretty much unnecessary, but he was there at the end. So that, as I say, a feather in his cap. Right now, as I say, with Red Bull in this greater fight with Ferrari and McLaren, bearing in mind that both Ferrari and McLaren have two drivers on a relatively equal footing and able to score points on a relatively even keel, that Max without Checo is seriously going to compromise their Constructors' Championship chances this season.
Sam, should Checo be retained for 2025, who do you think that's the biggest blow for? Daniel Ricciardo, Yuki Tsunoda, or Liam Lawson?
I think simultaneously, both Yuki Tsunoda and Liam Lawson. I think, and I agree with, we put out a poll recently, and I think it was 84% of respondents said they thought Tsunoda should get the second Red Bull seat. That obviously has a knock-on effect, and that knock-on effect is what impacts Liam Lawson. I think if we're being realistic, what should happen is, if Perez is retained, is that Ricciardo's the one to make way for Liam Lawson. I think next year it would be time, in my personal opinion. I don't know if Red Bull or RB, rather, obviously they're all centrally contracted, whether they would make that call, because Daniel is the is a well-loved member of that team. So it's difficult to call it on a career such as his. I think that's probably how it should go. But again, it's this kind of, I think it comes back to, is Perez the right option? I don't think he's the best option, but I think in many ways he is the right option. We've seen how well he can drive defensively. Look back at in 2021, how he drove against Hamilton on a number of occasions in that kind of rear gunner role. But as Ian rightly points out, in order to do that, he first has to be in that position to do that. So that's where it's difficult. But yeah, I think it's Tsunoda, I think has long been slept on and overlooked. And I think people are starting to the opinion is turning on Yuki Tsunoda. I think people feel that it should be his opportunity.
Yeah, and what surprises me as well, again, about this Perez situation, if he is confirmed either this weekend or around the Spanish Grand Prix weekend, why Red Bull has chosen to do this? Because it's not like there are other teams where they have to pull in another driver from elsewhere. They have a pool. They have that pool, and you've just reeled off the three names there: Daniel Ricciardo, Yuki Tsunoda, Liam Lawson, if they really wanted to look for another two. So, as I say, they're not being forced into making a decision so early. So why not leave it that bit longer to see if Checo is just having one of those slumps that he goes through on occasion over the course of a season, or if this is something more long-term. And as we saw last year, it was more long-term before he finally managed to haul himself out towards the back end of the season and just do enough to hang on to that second place in the Drivers' Championship. As I say, with Red Bull having those options, I genuinely don't see why they've got to make a decision so quickly. Doesn't make any sense to me. I'm sure they have their reasons. Maybe it's something to do with $30 million worth of sponsorship that Checo brings in, and there might be certain contract clauses related to that. Who knows? But again, I would be surprised, because they are the front-running team at the moment. And even if they lost that $30 million worth, whatever it might be, from all those sponsors that Checo brings in, I'm sure they could very quickly bring other sponsors on board. There must be many partners out there willing to team up with Red Bull in terms of sponsorship advertising and getting their sticker on the car and the overalls, etc. So I think there might be a small factor with regard to the financial element. As I say, maybe contractual clauses kick in with regards to the people behind Checo and the brands that he's got. But yeah, I'd wait. I really would wait if I was Helmut, Christian, and whoever else wants to make the call on that.
One team, of course, who have already got all their business done for the next couple of years is Ferrari, with obviously Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton. Leclerc, obviously in Monaco, finally at long last got the victory he's been waiting his whole life for, basically. We saw the emotion, on the in lap. We saw the emotion on the podium and also in the sea afterwards with Fred Vasseur. Do you think we're going to see a different Charles Leclerc going forward, given how big a monkey this is now off his back?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to Fred Vasseur's post-Monaco Grand Prix press conference when he turned around and said that the victory for Charles would be a weight off his shoulders. And you can understand that as well, because after all, any driver wants to perform first and foremost around their home circuit. And that is a true home circuit for Charles Leclerc. He's gone to school, walked those streets, gone to school, restaurants, past restaurants, etc. And secondly, as well, bearing in mind that he'd also had 2 previous pole positions at Monaco and failed to convert that into a race victory around the Principality. So without a shadow of a doubt, I think now this will do something for him. I think he will most definitely be a different driver going forward, because all of a sudden he has, used the phrase you mentioned, Nick, got that monkey off his back. Good expression, that one. And yes,
thank you very much.
Going into Canada, he's now only 31 points behind Max Verstappen. You asked earlier, have we got a championship battle on our hands? I think if he can now chip away at that gap with the confidence that he will have gained, particularly bearing in mind when you think back to 2022, the year the new aerodynamic regulations had kicked in. He started off that season brilliantly, and then it was just these errors that occurred not only within Ferrari strategy on the pit wall, but from within Charles himself. And there were question marks then around him. Has he really got what it takes to be a champion? Because it's always been suggested that he is just a champion in the making. He will win that world title at some point throughout his career. But that particular season, all of a sudden, question marks started to appear. Yes, he still has plenty to do this season, but I think from everything that we have seen so far, from what he has delivered on track, and in particular what was a consummate performance across the entire Monaco Grand Prix weekend, I think we saw a very different Charles Leclerc. And that win now, I think, will be a game changer for him. And I think most definitely he will be a different driver going forward for the rest of this season.
Sam, I would ask for your thoughts on Leclerc, but I think this is a first for the Racing News 365.com podcast, because whilst recording, we have some breaking news. It has been confirmed that Esteban Ocon will be leaving Alpine at the end of the season. I mean, it's big news. It's another moment in what is already a crazy, silly season. What do you make of that? This is live reactions.
I think that the writing was somewhat on the wall after Monaco. I think obviously this will have been in the works for a while. There's been rumours that Ocon was looking for a way out. There's been rumours that Gasly was looking for a way out, given that Alpine, how they've started the season. Ocon was always the more likely to leave. He's also been performing better than Pierre in the first 8 rounds of the year. Haas was touted as a potential destination. You've got to assume that he's got something lined up. He's good enough to be in F1 for sure. So yeah, it's interesting. I think the real kind of question is who then takes his seat. Do they just go play it completely kind of obvious? Go, yeah, Jack Doohan, he's next in line. He's our reserve driver who we're going to promote from within. Or is there a reuniting with, say, a Zhou Guan Yu and all the commercial options that he brings a team? Alpine, we know, has sought investment multiple times in the last few years. It can be quite an unstable environment. And yeah, it's very interesting that obviously in the wake of what happened in Monaco, Bruno Famin's comments about, there'll be consequences. I think people will now jump to these are clearly the consequences. Lots of people kind of proffered that it would be a race benching for the Canadian Grand Prix. That's not happening, as we know. So I can't see that this is the immediate kind of reaction. I think if it was heading that way, I think maybe it was the final kind of say, but clearly the relationship has been kind of deteriorating for some time.
Yeah, I mean, the rumour was anyway, even before that incident, that Esteban would more than likely be parting ways with Alpine anyway at the end of that season, end of this season, sorry. So I think to put two and two together, and Bruno Famin saying consequences during that interview clip, red flag period, while that massive crash was cleared up on lap one, to then this being the outcome, the upshot, that's putting two and two together and making whatever number you want to come up with other than 4. So for me, the writing was on the wall anyway. And I think, as Sam has rightly pointed out, this decision by Alpine and what happened in Monaco was probably the straw that broke the camel's back for Alpine to ultimately decide, right, we've made a call, or we were thinking about it, that was in our thoughts. This is now our firm decision, but we've decided to part ways. The bigger picture now for Esteban Ocon is, where's he going to go? We might as well talk about that right here, because he is a driver throughout his career that has had collisions on 6 occasions with a teammate. Quite clearly, there is a bit of a red mist that comes down with this guy. And Martin Brundle mentioned it as well in his Sky Sports column on the Monday following the Grand Prix, that something happens with Esteban and he can't help himself. It's like a little bit of a hair trigger inside with this guy. We know from Daniel Ricciardo's viewpoint that he said he had seen Esteban and Pierre bang wheels twice prior to that big incident. So were those incidents the forerunner to what Esteban ultimately tried to do, Portier, make the most ridiculous move up the inside, which led to him, as we now know, getting this 5-place grid penalty for the coming race in Canada. So will any other team want to take a guy of this temperament on? That's my question for you two guys. I'll pose a question for you.
Then I can then build on that. So I can then build on that, because actually it's also important to remember he is still on the books with Mercedes. He's still technically, I know it's not the right wording, but a Mercedes junior, despite obviously the fact of the age he is. So Sam, this is now 2 questions for you, Sam. Because does then that also play a part, especially when obviously the man behind Mercedes is Toto Wolff, who I imagine is probably quite good at negotiations?
I will dig out a tweet that I think I posted before Bahrain, where I said, if Alpine's pace is as bad as we're being led to believe it is, Ocon's management team will be pushing like hell, even for just a year in that Mercedes. I don't think it's going to happen now, but it's interesting that now this is kind of coming to fruition, almost, that Toto Wolff has to find a new home for Esteban Ocon. And just to go back slightly to touch on what Ian was saying, it's interesting how almost the power dynamic of the Alpine-Ocon relationship has shifted somewhat in the last 2 weeks, where it was always Ocon looking for a way out. And now it kind of feels more like Alpine have been the ones to ultimately call it and say, you know what, we're going to stop trying to court you actually and get you to sign an extension. We're going a different route. Valtteri Bottas is an option. There's lots of options there. For Ocon, I think it really comes down to either Haas or the Audi project. If the Audi project can't get science and he goes to, say, Williams, is Ocon the best alternative? Pace-wise, speed-wise, over 1 lap? Probably yes. But this is a big project that wants a big, marketable front to it. And teammates that come together, I'm not sure how marketable that is. So there's a lot of moving parts to this. So yeah, it's going to be a fascinating kind of few weeks. But yeah, you'll move Toto Wolff.
And I suppose as well, something that should perhaps also be remembered in terms of who could be at Alpine next season is Alpine do have Mick Schumacher on the books. He's been spoken about very highly by Bruno Famin. He's obviously doing Alpine's World Endurance Championship program. Is he potentially someone who could rival Jack Doohan for that seat, do you think, Ian?
No.
Straight
in
to
a word,
it?
No. Straight to it.
It would be a mistake.
Yeah. exactly. I think it's emerged that Mick, whilst a lovely guy, and obviously had two very difficult seasons at Haas, is not quite at the caliber to be a Formula One race driver. Again, I don't think we're going to see Mick in a Formula One race car anytime in the future. He's great in his reserve role, in his simulator role. He's been praised considerably for some work he's done back in the simulator. But Jack Doohan, I know from inside Alpine that he is very highly thought of. He was praised considerably for the work that he did for Alpine in the simulator in particular over the course of the Monaco Grand Prix weekend. He was up to the early hours trying to get that car right for the guys. And Pierre Gasly, I know, was super complimentary about the effort that Jack had done. So I think if they do decide to go down a rookie route, because he's well known, then I could see Jack most definitely being propelled into that car ahead of Mick. As I say, Mick does a great job with Mercedes in terms of, as I say, that background role. And I know they're very grateful for that work that he does. But the belief it has been a long-held belief now that he's not quite at the caliber to be back in a Formula One car. Brutal as that sounds.
And of course, on the topic of Jack, there are two exclusives with the man himself and Racing News 365.com. So it's important to plug that. One thing, though, that I think is interesting about this whole Alpine Ocon saga is so much obviously has been brewed around the comments that were made by Fam, and in particular, the use of the word consequences. Obviously, Ocon, following the Monaco Grand Prix, received a significant amount of verbal abuse. Obviously, he released a statement towards the end of last week where he confirmed that obviously he would be racing in Canada, which was the big speculation. Did consequences mean that Ocon was going to be dropped? Do you think with the way this has all kind of been dealt with, that perhaps Alpine have slightly shot themselves in the foot? Because as Ian, you mentioned, people are going to jump to conclusions now that, the consequence is Ocon's been dumped for next season.
Yeah, I think it's just the chain of events, isn't it? As I say, there were already rumours anyway, even before the Monaco Grand Prix took place, that Esteban was more than likely going to be on his way out at the end of this season. I think the fact that incident then happened, that Bruno Famin then turned around and, as we said, used that word consequences, and now we have this decision that Esteban's going to be leaving Alpine. As I say, I think it's just the way consequences, using that word, have unfolded. So just making sure again that nothing was cropping up on my phone, because I just saw something flash out the corner of my eye, and I just want to make sure that it was not another team announcing Esteban Ocon had been signed by them. So
it's all happening today.
It's well, no, that's definitely not it. I was just something else. But as I say, it's just the way I think the chain of events, the way it's transpired. Would Alpine have made this statement today if what happened in Monaco hadn't have happened? We don't know. We can only speculate upon that. But as I say, the suggestion was anyway that even if they hadn't come out with today's statement, it would have happened anyway at some point in the not so distant future.
And there's also the other side of it, that you could almost argue that would Bruno Famin have said what he said on live TV if it wasn't already heading this way? If you really want to keep hold of a driver and actually they hold the cards and they're the ones that you're trying to court, yes, it was a reaction in the heat of the moment, but we're talking about PR trained, high level operatives. He's a team principal of a Formula One team. I almost get a sense of, I think he felt he had the space to be very kind of outward spoken in that moment. I don't know if he maybe would have if the relationship was going to continue long term.
It's a really interesting point. And of course, be sure to check out racingnews365.com for all the reactions. I imagine there's going to be more stuff that's going to follow from this. Who knows when Alpine will announce who's going to replace Ocon? You'd imagine, given that this announcement's been made, perhaps a decision has already been made on a 2025 lineup. Who knows? Obviously, as soon as we know, we will bring you the news. Given the Ocon news, us three need to get away quite soon to start covering some Alpine stuff. So with that in mind, a bold prediction, Ian, for the Canadian Grand Prix. We need to go back to Canada now.
Right. On the spot there. Bold prediction.
On the spot.
McLaren pole position.
Sam?
Ocon race win. No, I'm joking. No, he's starting 5 places down from where he qualifies, so no. I wouldn't be surprised to see a continuation of what we saw in Monaco. Further tensions with Alpine.
Interesting.
Again, it would be difficult because it would be contingent upon Pierre finding himself further back than he probably should be, but I wouldn't be surprised.
I'm going to go Esteban Ocon points and a Charles Leclerc win. We spoke about his confidence, and I think he's going to be just on another level in Canada. Well, it's been a very interesting episode, it's safe to say, of the Racing News 365.com podcast. From myself, Sam, and Ian, we will see you this weekend for the F1 updates. See you later.
Take care, folks.